What are some of the common pain points you've seen?
Data center construction as it relates to AI demand. Problem is, we don't have the energy to service this demand.
Startups in the renewable energy are difficult to build.
If you start playing with regulatory requirements, it's very, very difficult. Nuclear is going to become a big thing.
The regulations were changed to adopt a construction technology.
Technology that helps streamline these approval processes. Not every company should be a startup. And
What space or niche do you think has the most potential going forward?
insurance industry in construction, and then tying the kind of performance results to the insurance.
How does startup dynamics differ across the world?
The EU, the US, Australia are going to need renovations versus new constructions. In India, new construction is a much larger concern. Startups in those countries influenced primarily by that, and then policy regulation downstream of that is
What's your prediction in the next 5 to 10 years?
space construction. How do we actually build a lunar railway network? How do we build digital twins and remote observation?
Private company doing R&D?
Figuring out how to mine on the moon. SpaceX reducing almost by 10,000 the cost of moving a kilogram into space.
In today's episode of Constructing Tomorrow, we have Bhragan Paramanantham. He is an innovative civil engineer at AECOM, currently embedded as an innovation advisor for Hive, Australia's first innovation incubator within a major construction program. He also runs Last Week in ConTech, a newsletter focused on macroeconomics and technology trends around the world. In this episode, we discuss about startups and the importance of accelerators, government regulations pertaining to construction tech, importance of energy with the increase in AI demand, insurance tech as the next big opportunity in ConTech, construction tech landscape around different continents, and is space construction possible in near future. With that said, I bring you Bhragan.
Thanks, Bhragan, for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sid. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, really excited to chat to you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk everything about what's happening in the construction technology world, and no better than you to talk about it. For those of you who don't know, Bhragan also has a weekly newsletter called as Last Week in Contact. Bhragan, you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So, Last Week in ConTech is just a newsletter really focused on helping people stay up to date with the latest in construction technology, but then also understanding some of either the macroeconomic factors or the regulatory and policy changes in the US, the EU, other countries that are influencing the way technology is developed. So it helps you to stay up to date, and then it helps you to also be more aware of the solutions out there so that, we as engineers can actually use solutions that help us to save time in our roles every day.
What was the idea behind starting this? I know you had some tech background and then also formal education in civil engineering.
Yeah, I guess the idea really came from my personal pain point. So I started as a graduate civil engineer, and I don't know if you felt this pain point before, but I went onto a job site and I just kind of looked around and I was like, oh, like this is a little bit different to what I was expecting from. I'd done an internship in a tech startup, and there you've got to be on kind of the bleeding edge of technology just to keep up. But in a job site, I was manually taking photos, manually marking notes on the plans, and then going back and writing these site reports where I'd try and figure out where I took my photos and then cross-reference it. And what I really quickly realized was there were solutions out there that allowed me to optimize my role. The problem was that given the dictates of the schedule and what we've got to deliver and how quickly we've got to deliver it, we don't really have the time to actually look for technology solutions. And I think that's the biggest problem. And that's what I felt was there's so much great technology out there, but we don't have any awareness of it. And then even though I had the awareness of this solution, I was like, what do I do to adopt it? Like, how do I actually run a pilot? Who do I talk to? How do I get this on site? How do we get everyone using it? And those were two key really problems that I wanted solved. And when I looked around and talked to people who were in the space, they were like, yeah, we just talk to everyone. We're on LinkedIn. And I was like, is there a way that we can make this easier and more accessible? So yeah, that's why I started the newsletter. And it was really my own personal pain point of going, I want people to use this technology because it kind of sucks not using it. Like it really sucks and takes up a lot of time. So I wanted to save my own time.
Yeah, I kind of resonate with your point, but then you also feel at this point, obviously, all the companies are getting caught up with all the technologies. We have like data management systems or PMIs, but Do you feel that right now there is a lot of solutions out there, and you're kind of, okay, do I have to use 10 different type of technologies to do 10 different tasks? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say yes and no. So I'd say in some verticals, you might see a lot more solutions, and you can see the market is moving towards consolidation and creating platforms simply because of the exact pain point that you've described. Like, I don't want to be jumping between 10 different solutions, and I want my solutions to be interoperable. So I want the data to be shared between all the solutions that are out there. So I think there was some research a while ago. I could be misquoting this, but it said that you've really got to be addressing 2 to 3 pretty clear pain points to gain adoption for your solution. So it's a little bit more broader. Having said that, we are still early in construction technology in terms of the total amount of funding, the amount of unicorns, so really big companies that have come out of this space. So there is still a lot of greenfield opportunity. Just I think why some sectors or portions of the technology mix feel saturated is when you see one company working. A great example is in reality capture, and a bunch of other companies go, "Oh wow, this company has found product market fit, is addressing a pain point. There's money in this space, so let's all enter." So then becomes a little bit more saturated. But that's kind of how it works, right? Like if someone sees an opportunity, other people are jumping on that opportunity. But there's large parts of the construction process, given how broad it is, that simply haven't been improved by technology or operational workflow improvements. And you can go as simple as like marketing tech for construction, fintech, insurance tech for construction. There are more solutions out there now, but there's still great opportunity. And given how big construction of a sector is, like it's 14% of the world's GDP or around that phase, there is so much opportunity still out there. It just feels in some sections, and the people that we always talk to, it can feel saturated sometimes.
Based on your research, what are some of the common pain points you've seen in the industry? And obviously, it would differ from continents, but what are some of the common ones?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, look, it's such a broad and difficult question to answer, but I'll probably answer it from the side of just seeing how like regulatory and policy changes are kind of influencing it. So I think on one like obvious pain point, and this is on a construction side, is data center construction as it relates to AI demand. So AI demand is increasing. Existing data centers can't really cope with that capacity in so many ways. So we need to build purpose-built AI data centers. The problem is we don't have the energy to service this demand. So we got to create more renewable energy. But then the problem is now we need to create transmission from where we're generating the energy, because there's only certain places that you can create renewable energy that connects to those AI data centers. So what you're finding that's really interesting on the technology side and the construction side is the localization of renewable energy assets. So nuclear energy is getting a lot of support in the US right now, even in Australia, a lot of other countries. The UK has it as part of their major plan. And we're going to have, or what they want is small modular nuclear reactors built next to AI data centers or large scale factories so that they're not really connecting to the grid in some ways. And there's a really cool company called Last Energy building in that space. So what they've gone is we know how to build nuclear reactors. The technology doesn't need to be improved, but the construction process should be improved. So can we build it in a modular and prefabricated way? So I don't think a startup and optimization is just simply on technology. I think technology can be used to improve the delivery and provide it at lower cost. So we can just start to not print out, but really churn out a lot more small modular nuclear reactors, for example, or, in other places like on the housing side and the residential side. And I think that's like a really interesting process of going, hey, like we're not selling our solution directly to the industry, but we see the pain point and we're just delivering, the energy capacity directly to you.
Would you say that startups in the renewable energy sector are difficult to build compared to other sectors?
I mean, I can't speak to it personally because I've never I've never involved in it. But I think if you start playing with regulatory requirements, it's very very difficult. Like, and the way I mean by that is if it's just a pure play tech solution and you need to convince people to use it, I think that's a little bit easier than convincing the political environment to change, right? Because for a company like Last Energy, Only recently, we saw Chicago or Illinois start to approve SMRs. We just saw some bipartisan legislation for nuclear as well. The environment didn't really shift until the last probably 24 months. I mean, just kind of guesstimating. But these guys have probably been in business for a lot longer. And they had this thesis of, hey, we think nuclear is going to become a big thing. Whether the market believe that or not isn't. And then you have to consider lobbying, how long it takes for regulation to run through Congress. It's such a difficult game, and you just need to survive until the market is ready for to purchase your product. And I think in a couple of years it will, but they need to have enough funding to survive that, and they need to convince their investors they have enough funding to survive that. So building a startup is hard on so many levels, but market timing is so important. So, a great example is what you're doing here today, or like what I've done with my newsletter. The market timing is important. And I think if I started writing it 5 years ago, I don't think anyone would have been interested in construction tech. I don't know if there would have been enough companies, but you are seeing more podcasts, more newsletters in construction tech because the funding amount's increasing, because the number of startups is increasing. So the market timing feels like it's a lot better.
Great point. You mentioned about the difficulty, especially when the government regulations are involved. Do you have examples where the regulations were changed to adopt a construction technology?
Yeah, okay. I can't think of off the top of my head, but I do remember reading an article called "It's like why it's so difficult to build in America now," and it was just highlighting how much longer it's taken for us to deliver projects. Environmental regulation was kind of addressed in this article as one standpoint of, hey, like we have all these environmental concerns and that is important, but sometimes it's stopping the way that we build and stakeholder concerns. And what they spoke to as an example was there was a dam that was starting to break apart in the US. So what they did is they went, all the environmental regulation for this moment in time isn't important, essentially because people's lives are at stake. So let's just overcome this and build as quickly as possible. And they were able to fix the dam in about 3 weeks. So what they were highlighting was we still have the capability to build. We still have all this requisite knowledge. What's really coming about is we have more regulation, and we do need more regulation, but there hasn't been a subsequent improvement in terms of productivity or technology that helps streamline these approval processes. So when you have an increase in regulation, but no ease in kind of overcoming that regulation or meeting that regulation, right? You're just increasing the regulatory burden, then it's obviously going to be slower to build. But yeah, that's just one case that I can probably speak to. And I know some examples of projects that are seen as major important infrastructure initiatives that are given the power in localized settings just to some way steamroll some of the stakeholder concerns and just say, hey, like this project is so important and we understand you have your community concern, but at the general state level, this is the goal behind the project. So we're going to overcome that and continue to build. So there's less comments to be overcome. And that just means that they can build a lot faster. And I've seen that on some projects. And I think that really, really helps.
With startups, what would you say a life cycle looks like?
Yeah, with startups, I think you could probably talk about like from pre-seed to Series B, that process. And speaking at a high level from the outside, because I personally haven't walked through that process. At a pre-seed level, that's really early when you have an idea, you're building out your proof of concept, and you would just want to validate. So you might get a bit of funding to help you to go full time, do a lot more customer interviews, show them prototypes, and get to a place where you have a minimum viable product. At that point, you might start consider raising your seed round. So you have a little bit of paying customers, bit of early traction. You know there's an opportunity in this area. And then you start to move to product market fit, which is kind of the holy grail in a way, right? Like you have customers who are willing to pay for your solution and you are meeting the needs of the market. And it's a broad enough market that you can sell to and potentially grow to $1 billion company. And what you're doing at Series A is just getting the money to, reduce your customer acquisition costs, increase marketing, increase sales, and just scale your company because you know the product that you're selling is meeting the market demand. So, and in some ways, right, like the role of a CEO changes because you go from going, hey, like I'm really thinking about product and improving product. And you always are, but you now need to build a team. And that's a different skill set at that Series A and post level. And then when you go to Series B, it's really growth. And I think just something to highlight about that is, not every company should be a startup, and not every company needs to be a startup.
What do you mean by that?
Because raising venture dollars it forces you to grow at an accelerated pace, and your company might not be able to support that. And in addition to that, you're forced to grow at the fund timelines pace. So if they need to return their fund in 7 years, for example, you need to grow to provide a 10x return, for example, within that time frame. So you've really got to consider if you want to build a startup, and if the startup makes sense for the opportunity that you're raising, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of accelerator cohorts as well. So we know Y Combinator. You worked as a mentor at Formwork Labs. What is Formwork Labs?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I can speak to it as well as kind of Alice and the people who run it, who are doing a great job. But what I could probably speak to is like why you should join an accelerator, and why, like me personally, I really like Formwork Labs. So Formwork Labs is run as a joint venture between Brick and Mortar Ventures and Built Worlds, if I'm not mistaken, and they're a construction technology focused startup accelerator. So for the construction industry. And what joining an accelerator really allows you to do is to accelerate your learning journey. So you're in 3 months, which is usually the cohort life cycle, you're able to learn a lot more and go to market faster. And there's various mechanisms for that. So one is you're in a pool of other people in the same process. So you learn off each other really well. The other thing that I think Formwork Labs does really well is they have really strong industry ties. So they'll connect you to mentors in the space, customers, potential customers in the space if the product meets, and you start to be able to show your prototype and get feedback really early, and really high quality feedback, because they're going to be introducing you to the companies that as a startup and as an individual are very difficult to access. But because they have the brand name, because they've been in the industry for so long and they're vouching for it, you're able to have those high quality conversations, which results in an accelerated feedback loop. And your product just starts to improve at a faster rate, because every time I have a customer conversation, I'm learning a little bit more. That leads to product feature development. And my next conversation, I understand the pain point a little bit better. And that starts to help with go to market as well. So when you start selling your product. So what I really like about it is, the mentorship, the cohort based learning. They'll also have education. So, hey, this is how you should think about sales. This is how you think about products. And all of this relating to the construction industry. So especially if you're a generalist founder, or you're coming, even if you are within the industry, because construction is so broad, you don't always have the right relationships. And in a relationship-based industry, an accelerator can be very valuable to you, because it helps you to meet the right people and have the right conversations that you could either be advisors, you could sell to them in the future. But those are really hard conversations and people to meet, even for for me personally as well. I wouldn't be able to meet those people if you're not going through as a startup in those programs. So that would be my thing of this is why it's useful to go through to an accelerator.
From your research, Bhragan, what space or niche do you think has the most potential going forward in construction technology?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a little bit partial to kind of the insurance industry in construction, which is a very different answer. And if you talk to any VC, and when I do talk to them, they're like, nah, this is not the space. But I think it's really interesting, just simply because as an industry, we're very focused on risk reduction. And the construction insurance industry, generally speaking, doesn't like to insure the construction phase. But the reason why they do it is it's a loss leader for kind of the building operation life cycle. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity to start quantifying how technology is actually improving the way that we deliver, right? So in terms of, we have reality capture, we have progress monitoring solutions, we have better scheduling solutions, we have concrete monitoring solutions. So every place that usually as an insurer you look at, hey, this is a risky place, we actually have the technology there to start monitoring it in more detail, and then tying the kind of performance results to the insurance. So if we're going, hey, over the last 2 years, we've used a reality capture solution. And this reality capture solution has reduced risk incidents by 15%, or like it's reduced safety incidents by 15%. Why am I not getting a reduction in my risk premium? And then if I'm a forward looking insurer, why am I not going, hey, if you use this solution, we will reduce your risk premium because we know that this solution has, across all our job sites, reduced risk. And then why am I not getting a referral bonus for forcing these companies to start doing that? Whether that's a startup or not is a different story. But I think it's just a really interesting place to play of like, we're getting more technology focused and that's improving risk. And that's why we're adopting the technology as an industry. Technology helps us to control and reduce risk. So why don't we start tying this closer to insurance tech solutions?
That's actually insightful. I haven't really heard anyone speak about like insurance technology. But do you feel that the current insurance process is very outdated?
I mean, yeah, look, I haven't dealt with it personally, but I would suspect it's as outdated as our industry in terms of just the way that they insure, the way the processes, the way it's relationship based. There's a couple of players. I think Jones Insurance, I could be mistaken there. Billy Insurance is another one. Shepherd Insurance is another one. Rosetta Risk Management, very, very interesting insurer. And they're starting to see this thesis, right? There was some report that came out that was like, when you look at Procore and you look at the amount of use of Procore, so you can categorize each construction company based on how deeply they use Procore. So they could use like 20% of its features, 80% of the features. They found that the companies that have an increasing use of Procore have a reduction in claims. So the more that they use technology, using Procore as this baseline for the entire technology stack, reduces the amounts of claims. So based on that premise, you can go, well, if you are a more technology enabled construction company, which is basically what you might think, oh, okay, now why don't we give you a reduction in insurance premium? Because we know that based on averages, or you'd have to do the maths here, that if you use more technology, you're going to have less payouts, right? And then why don't you do that at a solution adoption level? And why don't we start to use that as a way to get more solutions on site? And if I'm a big technology company like Procore, why don't I start working with actuarial firms? Why don't I start working with the insurance industry and say, hey, we don't work with this company, but we know that if they use our company products really deeply and we'll help them with training and onboarding, you can reduce their premium by X. And that should be included as, hey, you're paying my fee, but you're actually getting your fee back partially through a reduction in insurance and improved delivery.
Yeah, that brings up a great point in terms of all the data that we would also get for each sector, be it any particular kind of trade, be it any particular kind of software. What's your viewpoint on data solutions as an industry within construction?
Yeah, I mean, I think data solutions is where it's at in so many ways, right? Like, if you talk to anyone, information loss, data loss between design and construction, between construction phases, even between the building operation lifecycle of, hey, I'm the contractor and I've done all my quality, I've done all my plans. Now I need to hand this over to the building operator, right? Am I handing over PDFs, 50,000 PDFs with quality reports? Why don't we hand this over in some kind of data format that's usable? Do we have a unified standard, or can someone build a unified standard? There needs to be some kind of improvement in data operability, because from the construction phase just to the building operation phase, different people, if 5 years down the track I need to check for a quality record, there is no way on earth, or it's incredibly difficult to find that. I'm sure there's AI solutions which will say that they'll improve that, and I'm sure we'll get to a stage where we have that. But at the end of the day, an AI solution can only be as good as the data that's input into it. And if the data quality is different between every project, and we don't have good data ingestion processes, so like the way we capture and store it, then the AI can't do much if, it's a handwritten, like really bad. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Like forget even AI, like just normal reporting. If you're creating a Power BI report, if you're pulling it from different sources, the report is as good as the information you have in these data sources.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, just adding quickly to that is someone I was talking to was like, hey, like that's what we see, right? Data sensors or sensors on site to capture information is going to be really important, and making it interoperable with the rest, especially from a reporting perspective, because we can, make a solution that makes it easier for you to write inspection reports and write reports. But if we can't get good quality of data, then the decision making downstream is just not improved. And at the end of the day, we want to improve the decision making because that's going to have the biggest influence on site.
Bhragan, I'm interested to know about how does startup dynamics differ across the world. Maybe you can give an example with India, US, Latin America, Europe, and Australia.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like the way I'd probably say it is with startup dynamics is like the funding environment is different in different countries, and then the regulatory and policy environment is different in different countries. And I think a great example in the US and the EU, more specifically in the EU, is we're not building as many new buildings, but we have to renovate every existing building. And the building performance or energy performance of buildings directive essentially says that within the next 5 to 7 years, we have to renovate the 16% of the worst performing buildings. And then it's staged renovations for the rest of it. But because of that, you're having a lot of solutions come out that try to think about how we can improve that renovation process. But then also, how do we improve the grant application process? Because that's very complicated and very difficult. And that's a really big, complicated concern in the EU. And then in the US, that same problem exists. We don't have the same policy or grants to really support that as much. There is Local Law 97 in New York, which is focused on reducing emissions for buildings. So that's a dynamic where you see a lot more sustainability focused startups, because you're going to have material improvements in green cement in all these new renovations, as well as better insulation. So you see a lot of those startups coming out of the EU. In India, for example, we're going to have a lot more new building construction. And I mean, the story of Inframarket is the one that everyone knows. They're the massive unicorn, which just helped consolidate and improve the quality of all the suppliers, the smaller scale suppliers, so that you can get more material to the job site and do your new construction. Some interesting dynamics between India and the US is you're seeing more startups with US-based sales team and Indian software development team. So really improving on that arbitrage as well. But I think the biggest difference, LatAm I can't speak to a lot, but it is a massively growing market. So from Brazil to Mexico, they'll say Brazil is its own market compared to the rest of LatAm. I assume that's due to language differences. I could be mistaken. But yeah, Brazil is like a monster market in and of itself to penetrate. But yeah, speaking more broadly again, yeah, the EU, the US, Australia are going to have similar needs in terms of the way they're building stock, right? In terms of population growth influencing, we need renovations versus new constructions. In India, new construction is a much larger concern. I assume that might be a thing in LatAm. I can't speak to that. And then it might be a thing in Africa as well. So you're going to have startups in those countries influenced primarily by that. And then policy regulation downstream of that is also going to be influenced by that.
What's your prediction for construction technology in next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, it's a broad question. I mean, the thing that I always get excited about when I talk to people is, and I just fall down this rabbit hole of space construction. So there's more and more interest on how do we actually make moving to space feasible. So obviously Elon Musk with SpaceX has these ambitious targets, but then NASA also has very similar ambitious targets to get people to Mars and then have a long-term habitat on the moon by the end of this decade, the start of 2030, to actually build the construction for it. And then when you look at that, it goes, okay, how do we actually do that? So they gave contracts to Icon, which is a 3D printing startup, to be like, all right, how do we actually build using the local material on the moon, which is such a difficult problem because we don't know what the soil structure is like. And then they gave a funding to Northrop Grumman, I'm probably butchering the way they say that, to go, hey, like, how do we actually build a lunar railway network? Because we want to make this new colony self-sustaining. So it needs to have mining, it needs to have an entire economy that services the needs of requirements back here on Earth. So if we move mining to the moon, how are we going to actually make that feasible? We need infrastructure to make it feasible. And then every existing problem that we have on Earth is magnified, right? Like labor shortages. We don't have the spacesuit technology to move labor and actually construct things in space. Just imagine the risks and the safety concerns there. So, how do we get robots and prefabrication to do that? How do we build a supply chain solution to do that? How do we build digital twins and remote observation so that we can actually see what's happening on the moon? So, because we have this funding, we're going to start to see an accelerant and a convergence of military technology or defense technology and construction technology. And I think it is interesting that, and I suspect that more of this funding will be going towards, at least from NASA's perspective, to American companies or like Western alliance companies, because there's going to be security concerns related to this. So you are going to see an acceleration from government focus, but then it might be, I don't know how those solutions will deliver because there's going to be some geopolitical kind of considerations going with that as well.
So most of these are government contracts. There's no private company doing R&D.
I mean, there would definitely be private companies doing R&D to try and win those contracts as well, right? I think Bechtel has a space construction division. I was like Googling it pretty hard and I saw some people with titles that were related to space. I saw some people talking on podcasts related to space and going, hey, in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe this becomes really interesting and really exciting. So that is the space. And then there's other companies, which I can't think off the top of my head, that is mining or figuring out how to mine asteroids and mine on the moon, because that entire process is very difficult from an equipment standpoint to a supply chain standpoint. And those companies are doing early stage R&D, they get VC backing, but at the end of the day, to get those contracts and to be allowed to mine on the moon is going to be a government-led permitting and approval process. It's not going to be a private company process. And then, a broader question of who owns the moon, right? Who can give those contracts? How are we going to split this? So there's a lot of opportunity that I think right now there's a lot of early stage discussions that you see in the contracts, and I'm not privy to them. But if we get to a stage where the technology does improve as rapidly as it has, which it has with SpaceX reducing almost by 10,000 the cost of moving a kilogram into space, well, it becomes really exciting, and there's going to be so much money and opportunity. It becomes a natural step for companies to go, hey, growing segment. If we sell to one company in this segment and they make $10 million of revenue in year one, but they make year two, $50 million of revenue, year three, $100 million of revenue, our portion of that sale is going to increase. So why don't we just sell to this segment?
That was great insights, Bhragan. Last question. I usually like to end out the session asking some tips for young professionals, but I would like to ask you any tips if you're starting something new. I know you started your newsletters probably a year ago. Is it a year?
Yeah, about a year. It's actually, yeah, it's been a year. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like speaking to my own, just start. So I can speak to, yeah, at the start, I was like, will anyone read this? And at the start, no one was reading it, right? Like I think the first 3 months had 20 subscribers. So I was just doing it from personal interest. And I was also a bit nervous to tell people about it because I was like, is this actually good? And I had the same thing with LinkedIn posting. The first time before I post, I think it took me a month to write that first post because I was super nervous and I was like, oh, I don't want to be one of those LinkedIn guys. And then now you just overcome that, right? The more familiarity, the more you do that, you overcome that. And I think that is the best advice that was given to me. And looking back was just start. I think I was in my head a lot more or a lot and just going, oh my God, like, will anyone read this? But at the end of the day, honestly, it doesn't matter if anyone reads it. I just enjoy it. And I enjoy the opportunities of talking to other people in this space who are doing cool things. Because if I can talk to a person who's selling to NASA, or if I get to talk to a person who's building something really cool, at the end of the day, that's exciting for me. So I think if you're just doing this like what you're doing now from either a learning perspective or an enjoyment perspective, keep doing it for that reason. And I think over time, the numbers seem to grow in and of itself. Obviously, there is marketing and things like that, but generally speaking, just start and then you have no idea what will come.
Awesome. Thanks, Bhragan, for being here.
Yeah, likewise, Sid. Really, man, really glad to be here, and I'm super excited and curious to see where this leads to because I think this will be really cool for you as well.
Thank you for tuning in to Constructing Tomorrow. I hope this episode provided valuable insights and tips. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a review or a comment. Until next time, keep building and stay curious.